Imagine leaving your marriage for a younger woman, convinced you've won the game of life. You're celebrating at the city's most exclusive restaurant, feeling on top of the world. Then you see her, your ex-wife, the quiet woman you cast aside. But she isn't broken. She's radiant, transformed, and deep in conversation with a man who could buy your entire life with his pocket change. This isn't just a story of a chance encounter. It's a gut-punching tale of ego, regret, and the terrifying moment a man realizes he didn't just lose his wife. He lost himself. The restaurant, Ethelred's, was a cathedral of hushed confidence. It didn't shout its wealth. It whispered it in the heavy drape of the velvet curtains, the reverent spacing between tables, and the way the candlelight caught in the deep polish of the mahogany bar. It was the kind of place Mark Dawson brought women he wanted to impress. Tonight, that woman was Jessica Hayes. She was radiant, her blonde hair catching the light like spun gold, her laughter a carefully calibrated melody designed to enchant. She squeezed his hand across the starched white linen. "It's perfect, Mark. Absolutely perfect." Mark felt a familiar surge of pride. This was his world now. Sleek, modern, and appreciative. Jessica was the living embodiment of his new life, a life unburdened by the comfortable, predictable weight of his 15-year marriage to Eleanor. He had traded worn-in slippers for stilettos, quiet evenings for glittering nights, gentle acceptance for hungry ambition. He'd chosen excitement, and Jessica was nothing if not exciting. "Only the best for you," he murmured, lifting his wine glass in a toast. The sommelier had recommended a 2012 Bordeaux, and its rich, complex notes were a perfect complement to his feeling of absolute victory. He had successfully navigated the messy, painful divorce and had come out on top. His business was thriving, his new partner was a decade younger than his ex-wife, and he felt a vitality he hadn't in years. It was as he was taking a self-satisfied sip of wine that his gaze drifted across the room. And then, his world tilted on its axis. Sitting at a secluded corner table, bathed in a soft pool of light that seemed to grant her an almost ethereal glow, was Eleanor. His Eleanor! No, he corrected himself instantly, a sharp, bitter jab. Not his Eleanor, not any more, but it was her. He would know the gentle curve of her neck anywhere, the way she tilted her head when she was listening intently. She was wearing a simple, elegant dress of deep sapphire blue that he'd never seen before. It clung to her in a way that was both modest and arrestingly beautiful. Her brown hair, which she used to pull back in a practical, often messy bun, was styled in soft waves that framed a face he barely recognized. The exhaustion that had settled into her features during their last year together was gone. The faint lines of worry around her eyes had vanished. She looked serene, peaceful, and she was not alone. The man sitting opposite her commanded the space without effort. He wasn't boyishly handsome or flashy. He was something far more formidable. He had silvering hair at the temples, a face that spoke of shrewd intelligence and quiet authority, and he wore a bespoke suit with the casual air of a man for whom such luxury was merely wallpaper. He leaned forward, his attention entirely on Eleanor, a small, genuine smile playing on his lips as she spoke. There was an intimacy in the way they shared the space, a comfortable silence that spoke volumes more than any loud laughter could. Mark's heart began to pound a heavy, painful rhythm against his ribs. The Bordeaux suddenly tasted like ash. "Mark, what is it?" Jessica's voice, usually a welcome sound, was a sharp intrusion. "You look like you've seen a ghost." He couldn't tear his eyes away. "It's Eleanor," he said, his own voice sounding distant and hollow. Jessica followed his gaze, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows knitting together. Her initial curiosity quickly curdled into a familiar, possessive annoyance. "Oh. Her." She took in the scene. The dress, the restaurant, the man. A flicker of something sharp and insecure crossed her face before she masked it. "Well, she cleans up nice." "Who's the old guy?" "I don't know," Mark breathed. The man laughed at something Eleanor said. A low, pleasant rumble. He reached across the table and briefly, gently, covered her hand with his. It wasn't a grab or a display. It was a gesture of profound tenderness. Eleanor's smile in response was luminous. It was a smile Mark hadn't seen in years, a genuine, unguarded expression of happiness that struck him with the force of a physical blow. He felt a hot, ugly wave of something he refused to name as jealousy wash over him. It was possessiveness. It was shock. It was a primal, territorial rage that made no sense. He had been the one to leave. He had been the one who told her they had grown apart, that he needed more. He had sat in their living room, surrounded by the life they had built, and methodically dismantled it with clinical, cutting words while she wept. And now, here she was, not just surviving, but thriving. In a place like Ethelred's, with a man who looked like he could buy and sell Mark's entire company as a weekend hobby. The waiter arrived with their appetizers, a delicate tower of tuna tartare for him, seared scallops for Jessica. The sight of the food turned his stomach. "I can't believe she's here," Jessica said, picking at a scallop with a little too much force. Her voice had a brittle edge. "This is our place." "It's a restaurant, Jess, not our living room," Mark snapped, the words sharper than he intended. Her head shot up, her eyes wide with hurt. "What's wrong with you? It's just your ex-wife. You're the one who wanted the divorce, remember? You should be happy for her." But her tone implied he should be anything but. She wanted him to see Eleanor and feel validated in his choice, to see a woman diminished by his absence. The woman across the room was the opposite of diminished. She was radiant. Mark couldn't answer. He was trapped in a vortex of memory and regret. He remembered Eleanor in her gardening clothes, smudged with dirt, her face lit with simple joy over a new rose bush. He remembered her crying over a burnt dinner she'd tried so hard to make perfect for his birthday. He remembered the way she'd looked at him, with a trust so absolute it had eventually felt like a burden. He had thrown all that away for this, for the thrill of the new, the ego boost of a younger woman. And for a moment, sitting in the opulent restaurant that was supposed to be a monument to his success, he felt a terrifying, sinking feeling. The feeling that he had made the single greatest mistake of his life. The man with Eleanor signaled for the check. As he pulled out his wallet, Mark caught the glint of a watch, a Patek Philippe. It was subtle, but unmistakable, a quiet statement of immense wealth. The man was Julian Croft. The Julian Croft. The tech billionaire, the philanthropist. Mark had read about him in Forbes. His net worth was a staggering, incomprehensible number. Mark felt physically ill. How did Eleanor, his quiet, unassuming Eleanor, end up sitting across from Julian Croft? The question echoed in the sudden, cavernous emptiness that had opened up inside him. He watched as Croft helped Eleanor with her coat, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They moved toward the exit, their path taking them not far from Mark and Jessica's table. For a heart-stopping second, he thought Eleanor would see him. He both craved and dreaded it. He wanted her to see him, to see what she'd lost, but the man he was with, Jessica, suddenly felt cheap and performative. He wanted to hide. Her eyes swept the room, a polite, disinterested glance. They passed right over him. There was no flicker of recognition, no hint of a painful memory. It was as if he were just part of the furniture. A stranger. And then they were gone. The silence they left behind was deafening. "Well," Jessica said, trying to sound breezy, "that was awkward." But Mark wasn't listening. He was staring at the empty doorway. The ghost of Eleanor's happy smile burned into his vision. The victory he had felt just 20 minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a world, and he was only just beginning to understand what had taken his place. The house on Maple Street had been their universe. It wasn't a mansion, but it was theirs, purchased with a down payment Eleanor's parents had gifted them, and a mortgage that had felt like a mountain. For 15 years, its walls had absorbed the echoes of their life. The early days of struggling and laughing, the quiet grief of a miscarriage in their 5th year, the celebration when Mark's marketing firm finally turned a profit. Eleanor had been the architect of its soul. She had chosen the warm, buttery yellow for the kitchen walls. She had planted the climbing wisteria that now cascaded over the porch in a fragrant purple waterfall each spring. Her presence was in the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice on the nightstand, the scent of lavender from the soap she made by hand, the slightly lopsided ceramic mugs she'd made in a pottery class. For Eleanor, the marriage hadn't been failing. It had been settled. It had shifted from the frantic passion of youth to the deep, quiet river of companionship. She thought that was a beautiful thing, a sign of strength. She saw Mark's increasing late nights at the office and his growing distance as the price of his ambition, a phase they would navigate together, as they had navigated everything else. The betrayal, when it came, was not a single dramatic explosion. It was death by 1,000 cuts. It started with a new scent on his shirts, a sharp floral perfume that wasn't hers. It was in the way he guarded his phone, angling it away from her on the couch. It was in the new gym membership, the expensive clothes, the sudden critical comments about her appearance. "Have you thought about doing something with your hair?" he'd asked one evening, his eyes scanning her with a detached, analytical coolness that made her feel like a piece of outdated furniture. Eleanor, bless her trusting heart, had tried. She'd booked a salon appointment. She'd bought a new dress. She'd suggested date nights, hoping to reignite a spark she hadn't even realized was dying. Each attempt was met with polite disinterest or a sigh of weary impatience. She was a problem to be managed, a project he no longer had any interest in. The name Jessica first appeared on a credit card statement, a charge for a ridiculously expensive lingerie store. When Eleanor had confronted him, her hands trembling, he had deployed the gaslighter's masterstroke. "It was a gift for you, Elle," he'd said, his voice smooth and placating. "A surprise? You've ruined it now." He made her feel foolish, suspicious, and paranoid. She had actually apologized. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday. It was raining, a miserable gray drizzle that matched the color of her world. He came home early, which was rare, and his face was set like stone. He didn't sit in his usual armchair. He stood by the fireplace, a stranger in their shared living room. "Eleanor, we need to talk," he began, and she knew. In that instant, she knew it was over. The words he used were cruel in their clinical detachment. "I'm not happy. I feel suffocated. We've grown into different people. I need something more." He never once said, "I'm having an affair." He framed it as a mutual failure, a sad, inevitable drifting apart. But he placed the weight of the stagnation squarely on her shoulders. She was the comfortable, the predictable, the anchor holding him back from the exciting life he deserved. "Is there someone else?" she'd finally whispered, the words tearing at her throat. Mark had the audacity to look offended. "This isn't about anyone else, Eleanor. This is about me, about my life." It was the ultimate erasure. Her pain, their 15 years, their shared history. None of it mattered. It was all about him. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers and logistics. Mark was ruthlessly efficient. He wanted the house sold. He wanted the assets divided. He wanted it done quickly. He had a new life waiting, and the remnants of his old one were an inconvenience. Eleanor felt like she was being dismantled, piece by piece, by the man who had promised to be her partner in all things. The day he moved out, she found a single blonde hair on the lapel of a suit he'd left behind in the closet. The truth, stark and undeniable, hit her with the force of a physical assault. He had lied until the very end. The entire narrative he had constructed, of his unhappiness, of their mutual drifting, was a fiction designed to absolve him of guilt. He hadn't just left her. He had cheated, lied, and betrayed her in the most fundamental way possible. After the divorce was finalized and the house was sold, Eleanor found herself adrift. She moved into a small, sterile apartment that smelled of fresh paint and loneliness. Her identity had been so entwined with Mark's, with their home, with the life she thought they were building, that she no longer knew who she was without it. She was just Mark's ex-wife, a discarded thing. Some days, the grief was a physical weight that kept her in bed. Other days, it was a hot, simmering rage that had no outlet. She would walk through the city and see couples holding hands, and a chasm of loss would open beneath her. She saw Mark's smiling face on social media, pictures of him and Jessica on vacation in Bali, at galas, living the vibrant life he'd claimed he needed. Each photo was a fresh stab of pain, a confirmation of her own inadequacy. She felt invisible, worthless, and profoundly, terrifyingly alone. This was her rock bottom, sitting on the floor of her empty apartment, eating ice cream out of the carton, and scrolling through pictures of her ex-husband's new life, the silence of her own screaming in her ears. She had given a man 15 years of her love, her loyalty, and her labor, and he had thanked her by trading her in for a newer model. The power imbalance was absolute. He had all the happiness, all the success, all the future. She had nothing but memories that had been retroactively poisoned. It was in that quiet darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of her past, that a tiny, defiant spark ignited. It was the faintest flicker of anger, not at Mark, but at herself. Anger for letting her worth be defined by him. Anger for believing she was nothing without him. She closed the laptop. She pushed the ice cream away. She stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't have a plan, but for the first time in months, she made a promise to herself. She would not let him be the end of her story. She would survive this. And she would learn to be Eleanor again. Not Mark's wife, not Mark's ex-wife. Just Eleanor. Eleanor's journey back to herself began not with a grand gesture, but with a single, deliberate step. She enrolled in a landscape design course at the New York Botanical Garden. It was something she had always wanted to do, a passion she had relegated to a weekend hobby while supporting Mark's career. The feel of soil under her fingernails, the meticulous study of Latin plant names, the quiet satisfaction of coaxing life from a seed. It was grounding. It was hers. For the first time in years, she was learning and growing for her own sake. The other students weren't interested in her marital status. They were interested in her thoughts on perennial placement and soil acidity. She slowly began to build a new identity, one rooted in her own talents and interests. She was no longer just a component of a failed marriage. She was a woman with a keen eye for color and a deep understanding of horticulture. After completing her certification with honors, she took another leap. Using a portion of her divorce settlement, money that felt tainted until she decided to reinvest it in her own future, she started a small bespoke landscape design business. She called it Verdant Renewal. The name was a private, defiant promise to herself. Her first clients were small residential projects. She poured her heart into them, transforming neglected backyards into lush, tranquil oases. Her work was her therapy. Every garden she designed was a piece of her own broken soul that she was carefully, lovingly putting back together. Word of her talent, her professionalism, and her unique artistic vision began to spread. It was through her work that she met Julian Croft. He wasn't just a name in Forbes to her. He was the head of the Croft Foundation, a major benefactor of the Botanical Garden. The foundation was planning a massive public project, the restoration and redesign of a derelict community garden in a low-income neighborhood. They were looking for a designer who understood not just aesthetics, but community and sustainability. Eleanor's burgeoning portfolio, with its emphasis on native plants and eco-friendly designs, caught their attention. She was terrified before the presentation. She was pitching to a board that included one of the wealthiest, most influential men in the country. The old Eleanor would have been paralyzed by self-doubt. But as she stood before them, speaking about the transformative power of green spaces, about creating a place of beauty and peace for people who had little of either, she wasn't thinking about Mark, or her divorce, or her own insecurities. She was thinking about the garden. Her passion was authentic, her knowledge was deep, and it shone through. Julian Croft listened, his expression unreadable. He asked sharp, insightful questions that cut through the fluff and got to the heart of the project. He challenged her on budget, on long-term maintenance, on community engagement. Eleanor met each question with a calm, well-reasoned answer. She wasn't trying to impress him. She was defending her vision. She won the contract. Working with Julian was nothing like she expected. She had anticipated a distant, hands-off billionaire who would sign checks and expect results. Instead, he was deeply, personally involved. He would show up to the site in jeans and a worn baseball cap, asking about the soil composition or the choice of a particular shrub. He wasn't a dilettante. He was a genuine, lifelong amateur botanist. They found common ground, a shared language in the world of plants. Their conversation started with horticulture, but soon drifted. He asked about her life, and for the first time she found she could talk about her divorce without her voice breaking. She didn't frame it as a tragedy. She spoke of it as a painful but necessary catalyst for the life she was now building. She discovered that Julian, for all his immense wealth and power, was a man marked by a quiet loneliness. His life was a fortress of lawyers, assistants, and board members. He was surrounded by people who wanted something from him. In Eleanor, he found someone who wanted nothing. She was passionate about her work, and she treated him not as a billionaire, but as a collaborator. He was drawn to her resilience, her quiet strength, and her complete lack of artifice. "You never seem impressed by any of this," he said one afternoon, gesturing vaguely at his car, a sleek black Bentley waiting to whisk him away. Eleanor smiled, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "It's a beautiful car, Julian, but it's not as beautiful as that Japanese maple we planted this morning. One is built, the other one grows." That was the moment their relationship shifted. He began inviting her to dinner after their site visits, ostensibly to discuss the project. But the talk would inevitably turn more personal. He spoke of his own failed marriage, years ago, to a woman who had only ever loved his status. He spoke of the isolation that came with his success. He saw her, not as a victim, not as a project, but as an equal. The power imbalance that defined his world and that had crushed her in her old one simply didn't exist between them. They were just two people who found solace in each other's company. When he asked her to dinner at Ethelred's, she hesitated. It was the kind of place Mark would have loved, the kind of place that represented everything she thought she'd lost. But Julian wasn't Mark. And she wasn't the woman she used to be. "I'd love to," she said, and she meant it, putting on the sapphire dress that night. She hadn't felt like she was putting on a costume. She felt like herself. The woman who had built a business from scratch. The woman who could command a boardroom with her quiet expertise. The woman who was creating something beautiful and lasting for a community. When Julian took her hand across the table, it wasn't a gesture of possession. It was a gesture of connection. She felt seen, valued and respected for exactly who she was. She had no idea her ex-husband was sitting across the room, watching his own carefully constructed world crumble. She didn't see him because she was no longer looking for him. Her gaze was fixed forward on the promising, verdant future she was planting for herself. The days following the dinner at Ethelred's were a slow-motion car crash for Mark. He went through the motions of his life, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in a continuous loop of that single, searing image. Eleanor, radiant and smiling, her hand held by a billionaire. His sleek, minimalist apartment, once a source of pride, now felt cold and sterile. The sharp lines and monochrome palette seemed to mock him, a testament to a life that valued surface over substance. Jessica's constant chatter, which he used to find lively, now grated on his nerves. Her conversations revolved around social events, luxury purchases, and the lives of people he didn't care about. It was a shallow stream, and he was drowning in it. "I was thinking we should go to the Hamptons this weekend," she said a few days after the restaurant incident, scrolling through her phone. "The Pollocks are having their annual white party." Mark stared blankly at the television, not registering the show that was on. "I'm not in the mood for a party." Jessica looked up, her frustration palpable. "You're not in the mood for anything lately. Are you still thinking about her?" The way she said "her" was laced with venom. "It's not about her," he lied, the denial tasting like cardboard. "I'm just stressed with work." But it was all about her. He found himself engaging in a form of digital self-flagellation. He Googled Eleanor Vance. To his surprise, a professional website popped up. Verdant Renewal. He clicked on it, his heart hammering. The site was beautiful, elegant, clean, and filled with stunning photographs of her work. There were sun-dappled patios, vibrant flower beds, and serene, zen-like rock gardens. He read the About page, his stomach twisting with every word. It detailed her certification from the botanical garden, her philosophy of sustainable design, her passion for creating personal sanctuaries. This was a fully formed, successful professional. This wasn't the hobbyist wife he remembered. Then he saw the In the News section. There was a link to an article in a prestigious architecture magazine about the Croft Foundation's new community garden project. He clicked it. And there it was. A picture of Eleanor, standing beside Julian Croft, both of them holding silver shovels at a groundbreaking ceremony. The headline read, "Billionaire philanthropist and designer Eleanor Vance team up to bring green space to the Bronx. Designer Eleanor Vance." The name echoed in his head. She hadn't just taken back her maiden name. She had built a new name for herself, one associated with talent and prestige. He fell down a rabbit hole. He read every article he could find about Julian Croft, his tech empire, his staggering philanthropy, his reputation as one of the most brilliant and private minds of his generation. The man was a titan, operating on a level Mark could barely comprehend. And he was looking at Eleanor with an expression of open admiration. The jealousy that had sparked in the restaurant now ignited into a raging inferno. It was an irrational, primal anger. How dare she? How dare she be happy without him? How dare she find someone better? His entire sense of self had been predicated on the idea that he was the one who had upgraded. He had left the quiet, domestic life for a world of excitement and status. But the man with Eleanor wasn't just a status symbol. He represented a different galaxy of success. Mark felt like a man who had proudly traded in his reliable family car for a flashy sports car, only to see his ex-wife pull up in a private jet. His work began to suffer. He was distracted in meetings, his mind drifting back to that photo, to the name Designer Eleanor Vance. He snapped at his employees. He missed a crucial deadline on a major account. His relationship with Jessica began to fracture under the strain. She saw the change in him, the dark, obsessive cloud that had settled over him, and her insecurity manifested as anger. "I don't get it," she exploded one night after he'd spent another evening silently scrolling through his phone. "She's your frumpy ex-wife. Who cares if she landed some rich old guy? He's probably just using her. You're the one she really loved. You're the one she lost." Her words were meant to soothe his ego, to put him back on his pedestal. But they had the opposite effect. He knew Eleanor. He knew her integrity. She wouldn't be with a man she didn't genuinely respect and care for. And calling her frumpy was ludicrous now. The woman he'd seen was poised and elegant. Jessica's words just highlighted the chasm between the woman she wanted Eleanor to be and the woman Eleanor actually was. "You don't know anything about her," he said coldly. "I know. She's the reason you're acting like a miserable jerk," Jessica shot back, her eyes welling with tears. "I gave up everything for you. I was the one who was there for you when you were so unhappy in your marriage. Is this my reward? To be punished because she found a sugar daddy?" The phrase sugar daddy made him flinch. It was a cheap, vulgar dismissal of what he had seen. What he had seen was connection, tenderness, respect. Things that were suddenly, glaringly absent from his own life. He felt a desperate, overwhelming need to talk to Eleanor. He didn't even know what he wanted to say. Did he want to congratulate her? Yell at her? Ask her how she did it? Or did he just want to hear her voice and see if he could still find a trace of the woman he had known? The woman who had once looked at him as if he were the center of the universe? He found the number for Verdant Renewal on her website. He stared at it for a long time, his thumb hovering over the call button. His heart was pounding. This was a terrible idea. It was intrusive. It was selfish. He pressed the button. It rang twice, and then a cool, professional voice answered. "Verdant Renewal, this is Eleanor speaking." His breath caught in his throat. He had expected a receptionist. He had a whole speech prepared for a gatekeeper. But it was her. Her voice was the same, yet different. Calmer. More confident. The slight hesitation he remembered was gone. "Eleanor?" he managed to say, his own voice sounding weak and unfamiliar. There was a pause on the other end of the line. A silence so profound he could feel the years of their history rushing into the void. "Mark," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a flat, calm acknowledgement. And in that single word, he heard the vast, unbridgeable distance that now lay between them. "How did you get this number?" Eleanor's voice was perfectly level, betraying no emotion. It was the voice she used with contractors who were behind schedule, polite but firm, with an undercurrent of steel. "It was on your website," Mark stammered, feeling wrong-footed. "For your business, Verdant Renewal. It looks very successful. Congratulations." The words felt clumsy and inadequate. "Thank you," she said. The silence stretched again, taut and uncomfortable. She wasn't going to help him. She wasn't going to fill the void with polite chatter as the old Eleanor would have done. She was waiting for him to state his purpose. I saw you," he finally pushed out. "The other night, at Ethelred's." "I see," she said. Just 2 words, but they carried a world of meaning. "I see that you were there. I see that you saw me. And I see that it affected you enough to make you call me." "You looked happy," he said, and the admission felt like swallowing glass. This time, her response was softer, with the barest hint of something that might have been surprise, or perhaps pity. "I am, Mark." The simple, unadorned truth of it was more devastating than any accusation she could have leveled at him. He had been expecting anger, or bitterness, or even a gloating satisfaction. He had been prepared for a fight. He was not prepared for her peace. With him? The question was out before he could stop it, laced with an ugly possessiveness he couldn't hide. With Julian Croft? My personal life is no longer a subject for your commentary, she replied, the steel returning to her voice. Why are you calling, Mark? What do you want? What did he want? He scrambled for a reason, a justification that didn't sound as pathetic and needy as he felt. I was worried, he lied. Seeing you with a guy like that, a man with that kind of power, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. A short, dry laugh came down the line. It was a sound he had never heard from her before. It was completely devoid of mirth. Worried? You're worried about me. Mark, the last time you were worried about me was when you were worried I wouldn't sign the divorce papers fast enough. Let's not pretend this call is about my welfare. Her directness was disarming. The old Eleanor would have tiptoed around the conflict, trying to soothe his ego even as he was hurting her. This Eleanor held up a mirror, and the reflection was not flattering. That's not fair, he protested weakly. Fair? She shot back. And now, for the first time, a flicker of the old pain, honed to a sharp point, entered her voice. Fair was you telling me our marriage was failing because I'd gotten too comfortable when you were sleeping with your 25-year-old assistant? Fair was you telling me it wasn't about anyone else, while her perfume was on your suits? Fair was you making me feel like I was the one who had failed, so you could sleep at night. Don't you ever talk to me about what's fair. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the heart of his self-delusion. He had no defense. It was all true. I'm sorry, Elle, he whispered, the apology feeling hollow even to his own ears. I know I handled things badly. Handled things badly? She repeated, her voice incredulous. You didn't handle things badly, Mark. You systematically dismantled my sense of self-worth for your own convenience. You didn't just leave a marriage. You tried to burn the whole damn house down with me inside it. The only thing you miscalculated was my ability to find my own way out of the ashes. He was silent, stunned by the force of her words. This was the conversation they should have had 2 years ago, but he hadn't allowed it. He had controlled the narrative, and she had been too broken to fight back. The woman you think you're calling doesn't exist anymore, she continued, her voice softening again, the anger receding into a weary resolve. You destroyed her, and I spent the better part of a year grieving for her. But then I realized something. You didn't destroy me. You just destroyed the version of me that was designed to accommodate you. The version of me that put your ambitions before my own. That measured my happiness by the degree of your contentment. And I have to be honest, Mark. I don't miss her very much. A car horn blared in the background on his end. He was sitting in his parked BMW, the engine off, the plush leather interior feeling like a cage. I never knew you wanted to be a landscape designer, he said quietly. It was a stupid thing to say, but it was the only thing he could think of. You never asked, she replied simply. I am happy now, Mark, genuinely. And my happiness has absolutely nothing to do with Julian's money or his status. It has to do with me. It has to do with the fact that I get to wake up every morning in a life that I built, on my own terms. Julian is a part of that life because he sees me, the person I am now, not the ghost of who I used to be. He respects my work. He champions my independence. He doesn't try to diminish me to make himself feel bigger. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them. Like you did. I have to go, she said, her voice gentle again. I have a client meeting. Please don't call this number again, Mark. There's nothing left for us to say. I truly hope you find what you're looking for. Goodbye. And with that, she hung up. Mark sat in the silence of his car, the phone still pressed to his ear. He felt as though he had been stripped bare. Every lie he had told himself, every carefully constructed torn away. She hadn't screamed or cried. She had simply told him the truth, with a calm, unshakable dignity that was more powerful than any emotional outburst could have been. He had thought he was the one who had escaped a dying world for a better one. But in that moment, listening to the dead air on the line, he realized he was the one who was trapped. Trapped in a shallow life with a woman he didn't respect, haunted by the memory of a woman he had never truly known, a woman who had rebuilt her world without him, and in doing so had become more magnificent than he could have ever imagined. The power imbalance had been flipped so completely it made him dizzy. He was the one looking up from the bottom, and she was soaring. The phone call with Eleanor was a seismic event that sent shockwaves through every corner of Mark's life. His carefully curated world began to crack. The first and most obvious fracture was his relationship with Jessica. She had been waiting for him when he got home, her arms crossed, her face a mask of impatient fury. "Where have you been? And who were you talking to for an hour in your car? Was it her? You called her, didn't you?" The old Mark would have lied, placated, and smoothed things over. The new, shattered Mark didn't have the energy. "Yes, I called her," he said, walking past her into the kitchen and pulling a bottle of scotch from the cabinet. Jessica followed him, her voice rising with disbelief and rage. "Are you kidding me? After everything I said? What is wrong with you, Mark? What are you trying to do, get her back?" He poured a generous amount of liquor into a glass, the amber liquid sloshing over the rim. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Well, you'd better figure it out," she shrieked, "because I am not going to sit around and be your second choice while you have some kind of midlife crisis over your boring ex-wife who struck gold." The word boring struck a nerve. "She's not boring," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She's a successful business owner. She's rebuilding a garden in the Bronx. She's impressive." Jessica stared at him, her mouth agape. The look on her face was one of utter betrayal. He was defending Eleanor. To her. It was a violation of the unspoken pact they'd made. The pact that Eleanor was the past, the mistake, the lesser woman. "Impressive," she finally sputtered. "She plants flowers for a living, Mark. You run a multi-million-dollar marketing firm, and I'm the one who helped you get your biggest clients. I'm the one who networks for you, who makes you look good. What does she do?" He looked at Jessica then, really looked at her, and saw her with a terrifying clarity. He saw her ambition, which he had once found exciting, for what it was, a desperate, grasping need for external validation. Her identity was tied to the men she was with, the parties she attended, the brands she wore. She was a reflection, not a source of light. He had accused Eleanor of being a comfortable anchor, but he realized now that Jessica was the true anchor, weighing him down in a sea of superficiality. He had chosen this. He had mistaken her glitter for gold. "I need some space, Jess," he said, the words feeling both impossible and inevitable. "Space?" she laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You want space? Fine. Have all the space you want. But when you come crawling back, don't be surprised if I'm not here." She stormed into the bedroom, and he heard drawers being slammed shut. Meanwhile, in a world away, Julian Croft was having a very different kind of conversation. He and Eleanor were walking through the half-finished community garden. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the newly laid paths and freshly turned earth. "You seem quiet tonight," Julian observed, his tone gentle. "Everything all right?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided on the truth. It was the foundation of their relationship, after all. "My ex-husband called me today." Julian stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the focused attention in his eyes. "Oh? And what did the esteemed Mr. Dawson have to say?" There was a slight edge to his voice when he said Mark's name. "He saw us at Ethelred's. I think it unsettled him," she said. "He said he was worried about me, that he wanted to make sure I was okay." Julian's eyebrow arched. How noble of him. And what did you say? I told him the truth, Eleanor said simply, that I was happy, and that my happiness was my own creation. And I asked him not to call again. A slow smile spread across Julian's face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. Good, he said. That's my girl. He immediately seemed to catch himself. I'm sorry, that was possessive. What I mean is, I admire your strength, Eleanor. More than you know. It's not strength, she mused, looking at the skeletal frames of what would one day be benches. It's just clarity. For the first time, I see him for who he is. I see myself for who I am. The fog has lifted. Julian's gaze was intense. I've been meaning to talk to you about something, he began, his voice taking on a more serious tone. The Foundation has a number of international projects. There's a plan to develop a series of sustainable urban gardens in Lisbon. The lead designer just pulled out for personal reasons. Eleanor's heart began to beat a little faster. The work you've done here has been revolutionary, he continued. Your vision, your execution, it's exactly what the project needs. I know it's a huge ask. It would mean relocating for at least a year, but I want you to consider it. I want you to run it. Eleanor was speechless. This wasn't just another project. This was a career-defining opportunity, a chance to work on a global scale, to take her vision and apply it in a way she had never dreamed possible. And, Julian added, his voice softening, I happen to have a very nice apartment in Lisbon that is criminally underused. I find I have a sudden, compelling reason to want to spend a lot more time there. He was offering her the world. A career, a future, a partnership. But he was doing it in a way that centered her ambition, not his needs. He wasn't asking her to follow him. He was asking to join her on her journey. It was the polar opposite of her life with Mark, but a small, treacherous seed of doubt planted years ago by Mark's betrayal took root. Was this real? Or was she just another project for him, a lonely billionaire's interesting new hobby? The power imbalance was still there, a silent, towering presence. He could give her anything she wanted. What could she possibly give him in return? As if reading her mind, Julian reached out and gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Eleanor, I know what you're thinking. This isn't about me giving you something. This is about me recognizing the talent that is already there. You've earned this. Any doubts you have are the ghosts of a man who tried to convince you that you were small. You're not small, Eleanor. You're the most expansive person I've ever met. His sincerity was a balm on the old wound. She felt the last of the fog, the last of the doubt, finally burn away in the warmth of his gaze. I'll do it, she said, her voice clear and strong. I would be honored. He smiled. And in that moment, Eleanor knew that her redemption was not about finding a new man. It was about becoming the woman who was worthy of such a man's respect. And she was already her. Jessica left. She packed 3 suitcases with her most expensive clothes and handbags and departed in a dramatic flourish, leaving behind a note on the kitchen island that simply said, "Don't call me when you realize what you've lost." The silence in the apartment was vast and suffocating. Mark was alone, truly alone, for the first time in his adult life. The solitude did not bring clarity. It brought obsession. He replayed his conversation with Eleanor over and over, dissecting every word, every pause. He doesn't try to diminish me to make himself feel bigger. The words were a brand on his conscience. He had done that. He had kept her small because her smallness had made him feel large. In his panicked, desperate state, a terrible idea began to form. It was a grand, misguided gesture, born of ego, and a profound misunderstanding of the woman Eleanor had become. He believed, with the arrogance that had always been his tragic flaw, that he could win her back. He thought he could prove to her that he had changed, that he understood his mistakes. He would show her that he could be the man she wanted, a man who supported her dreams. He knew about the community garden project. He'd seen the articles. He decided he would become its biggest benefactor. He would swoop in, a white knight, and shower her project with a donation so large it would dwarf everyone else's. He would show her that he, too, could be a philanthropist. He would show her that he valued her work. He would buy his way back into her life. He called his accountant and arranged to liquidate a significant portion of his stock portfolio. The amount was staggering, far more than he could comfortably afford. But that was the point. It had to be a grand gesture. He then contacted the Croft Foundation, making his donation anonymously at first, with the condition that he be revealed as the donor at the garden's official opening ceremony. He imagined the scene. Eleanor, on stage, thanking the foundation, and then the announcer revealing that the surprise, transformative donation came from him. Mark Dawson. He pictured her face, the shock, the dawning realization of his love and regret. In his fantasy, she would weep, and he would walk onto the stage and take her in his arms. The day of the garden's opening was bright and sunny. The space had been transformed. It was a masterpiece of urban renewal, a vibrant tapestry of flowers, vegetable beds, and winding paths. The community had turned out in force. There was a feeling of joy and celebration in the air. Mark stood at the back of the crowd, his heart pounding, his palms sweating. He wore his most expensive suit. He felt like an imposter. He saw Eleanor on the small, temporary stage near the entrance. She looked breathtaking. She wasn't wearing a fancy dress, but simple linen trousers and a crisp white shirt, her hair tied back. She looked strong, capable, and happy. She was laughing with a city councilwoman. Julian Croft was there, of course, standing slightly to her side. He wasn't on the stage. He was in the crowd, watching her with an expression of quiet, profound pride. He was letting her have her moment. The gesture was so simple, so selfless, that it felt like a dagger in Mark's heart. The ceremony began. The councilwoman spoke. The community leader spoke. And then, it was Eleanor's turn. She stepped up to the microphone, and a hush fell over the crowd. She didn't give a stuffy, formal speech. She spoke from the heart. She talked about the power of a seed, the importance of having a place to breathe in a city of concrete. She thanked the community for their work, the volunteers for their time. Her voice was filled with a passion that was captivating. Mark felt a lump form in his throat. This was the woman he had called comfortable. Finally, the moment he was waiting for arrived. The director of the Croft Foundation stepped up to the podium. "And now," the director said, "we have one final, very special acknowledgement. This project was made possible by many generous donors, but we received a last-minute anonymous contribution that was so significant it will allow us to fund this garden's maintenance and programming for the next 10 years. The donor wished to be revealed today. We are incredibly grateful to Mr. Mark Dawson." A polite, scattered applause rippled through the crowd. Mark's name meant nothing to most of them. He stepped forward, as planned, a tight, practiced smile on his face. He walked toward the stage. He looked directly at Eleanor. Her face registered a flicker of shock, yes, but it was not the shock he had imagined. It was not awe or dawning love. It was a cold, profound disappointment. Her expression hardened, the light in her eyes dimming. She looked at him as if he were a particularly unpleasant insect that had crawled onto her picnic blanket. She took the microphone back. Her voice was steady, but icy. "On behalf of the foundation and the community, we thank Mr. Dawson for his unexpected contribution." The way she said unexpected made it sound like unwanted. She then turned her gaze to the crowd, completely dismissing him. But the real credit for this garden doesn't belong to any single large check. It belongs to every person who pulled a weed, to every child who planted a seed, to every senior who shared their gardening wisdom. This is your garden. The crowd erupted in thunderous, genuine applause. Mark stood, frozen, on the side of the stage. He was invisible. His grand gesture, his massive sacrificial check, had been reduced to a footnote. He hadn't bought his way back in. He had only succeeded in proving that he still didn't understand. He thought he could solve a problem of the heart with a problem of the wallet. He had tried to make the day about him, and she had, with grace and steel, given it back to the community. Julian Croft moved through the crowd and stepped up onto the stage, not to the microphone, but to Eleanor's side. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a shield. He looked at Mark, not with anger, but with a kind of clinical pity. It was the look of a king observing a court jester who had just made a fool of himself. In that moment, under the bright, unforgiving sun, Mark Dawson finally understood. It was over. It had been over for a long time. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost the chance to ever be worthy of the woman she had become. His money was worthless here. His grand gesture was empty. He turned and walked away, the sound of the joyful celebration of the world he could never re-enter chasing him down the street. The walk away from the garden was the longest walk of Mark's life. The suit that had felt like armor now felt like a clown costume. The city sounds, the traffic, the sirens, the chatter, were a cacophony that mirrored the chaos in his head. He had orchestrated his own public humiliation. He had tried to buy back the past, only to have the present slam the door in his face with quiet, dignified finality. He didn't go back to his apartment. He couldn't face the silence, the lingering scent of Jessica's perfume, the ghost of a life that had been built on a foundation of lies. He ended up in a nondescript hotel bar miles from his neighborhood, nursing the same scotch he'd been drinking for weeks. But this time, it wasn't fueling his obsession. It was washing down the bitter pill of truth. Eleanor didn't love him. She didn't hate him. She was, in a way that was far more painful, indifferent to him. He was a footnote in her story, a closed chapter. Her new life, her success, her happiness, none of it was a performance for his benefit. It was real, and he had no place in it. His phone buzzed. It was Jessica. "Heard about your little stunt at the garden," the text read. "Pathetic. I guess you've lost us both now." He stared at the message, and for the first time felt nothing. No anger, no regret. Just a vast, hollow emptiness. He had burned every bridge, and now he was stranded on an island of his own making. That night was his rock bottom. It was a different kind of rock bottom from Eleanor's. Hers had been a place of quiet grief. His was a place of noisy, ego-shattering failure. He had to look at himself in the mirror and see the man he had become. Selfish, arrogant, and profoundly insecure. The man who had torn down a good woman to feel powerful, only to discover what true power looked like, and that he had none of it. Redemption for Mark did not come in a flash of lightning. It came slowly, quietly, in the months that followed. It began with selling his cold, minimalist apartment. He sold his flashy sports car. He resigned from 2 of the exclusive social clubs Jessica had insisted they join. He began to systematically dismantle the life he had built to impress other people. He didn't try to contact Eleanor again. He finally understood that the greatest gift he could give her was his absence. Instead, he channeled his energy into the one thing he had left: his business. But his approach changed. He started listening more to his employees. He promoted a talented young woman in his company who had been consistently overlooked. He started a pro bono program offering his firm's marketing services to small, non-profit startups. He was trying, in his own clumsy way, to build something of substance rather than surface. He never remarried. He dated occasionally, but the relationships were different. He was no longer looking for a reflection of his own success. He was looking for a partner, and he knew he wasn't ready to be one. 2 years later, he was in an airport, waiting for a flight to a business conference, when he saw a magazine at a newsstand. It was an international design journal. On the cover was a stunning photograph of a terraced garden overlooking the ocean, with the headline, "The Lisbon Miracle: How Eleanor Vance is Redefining Urban Green Space." He picked it up. The article was a glowing profile of her work, her philosophy, her vision. There was a photo of her standing in the garden, looking confident and serene. She was alone in the photo. There was no mention of Julian Croft in the entire article, other than a brief credit to his foundation as the initial funding partner. The story was about her talent, her success. Mark bought the magazine. On the plane, he read the article from start to finish. He felt a pang, not of jealousy this time, but of a distant, bittersweet pride. He had not created this woman, but he had, through his own destructive actions, inadvertently set her free. He had been the catalyst for her magnificent transformation. He closed the magazine and looked out the window at the clouds below. He was not happy. Not in the triumphant way he had once defined the word. But he was at peace. He had accepted his loss. He had accepted his mistakes. He was living a quieter, smaller, more honest life. His redemption was not about winning her back. It was not about finding a new love. It was about finally, painfully, learning to live with himself. It was the quiet acceptance that his story was not a grand romance, but a cautionary tale. And in that acceptance, he found a sliver of grace. He had lost the world he thought he wanted, only to find the small, solid ground of a life he might actually deserve. And so, Mark's grand gesture became his greatest lesson. He learned that you can't buy back respect, and you can't erase betrayal with a check. Eleanor's story teaches us that our deepest strength is often forged in our deepest pain, and that true value isn't found in who you're with, but in who you become. Her redemption wasn't finding a billionaire. It was finding herself. What did you think of Mark's journey and Eleanor's incredible transformation? Who did you root for in the end? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like to let us know you want more content like this. And don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Most importantly, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Thanks for watching.